mining company Glencore has pleaded guilty to bribery, corruption and price manipulation. The company will pay about $1.5 billion in fines after it admitted to bribing officials in several countries. It's reported that, among other things, money was paid to avoid government audits and to make lawsuits disappear. Joining me now is the head of investigations at Open Secrets, Michael Marchant, who joins us via the virtual platform. Michael, good morning to you. Thank you very much for making the time to talk to us about this company, Glencore. Do you think that its affairs should be investigated here? I've just had a conversation with one of the ministers in President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet who says the president of this country, at least this one, he plays open cards, and so he's not going to be not transparent about these affairs.
Morning, Kwali, and morning to the viewers. Look, I think that Glencore's operations around the world need to be scrutinized. There's no doubt. What the United States settlement agreement shows is that what Glencore was doing is absolutely systemic bribery. So there was not a case of a few Glencore employees around the world, but rather that Glencore's entire business model across many jurisdictions and places appeared to be based on this model of paying bribes to access lucrative contracts, number one, as you said. And then if there was ever any hint of accountability and investigation or a court case, paying to make it go away. And I think as a matter of priority, South Africa's law enforcement agencies, the MPA, the Hawks, they should be going to the United States and saying, please provide us the information that's part of this investigation so that we can properly scrutinize, whether anything happened here. What I do think is important to say, and this is the elephant in the room, is that unfortunately there are a few very loud voices in South Africa that are saying the same thing for very different reasons. And there are a group of people who have been implicated in corruption at the Zondo Commission and elsewhere who are trying to use this as a distraction from their own conduct. And I think what we have to do is to be able to separate out the noise. We need to understand why they're doing that as a deflection, while not dismissing the need to scrutinize their conduct here and elsewhere.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is indeed the elephant in the room. But let's focus the attention on this company admitting to these bribes and price manipulation, but this has been done overseas, and you'll explain it to me better because you obviously are in the know here. The United Kingdom is mentioned, the United States is mentioned, Brazil is mentioned. At the same time, Glencore has had dealings on the continent of Africa, and the DRC is one of the countries that does get mentioned. These fines, are they going to be fines that are paid by Glencore for its operations in the companies I've mentioned, rather the countries I've mentioned, which is the US, Brazil, and the UK? What about dealings in Africa? Does that assume that dealings in Africa were above board?
I think it's one of the central problems with how multinational corporations like Glencore are held to account. So, as you say, Glencore is a very large company that operates around the world. And what the US settlement shows is that out of their London and their Swiss offices, they essentially had a cash desk where Glencore traders operating in places like the Ivory Coast, Nigeria, DRC could come, ask for cash to pay bribes, and then take that back to those countries and pay that money, again, to secure a contract or to make a case disappear, for example. What the US settlement does is it includes fines for that conduct, but the majority of the fines that the US authorities are imposing in this case is for price manipulation of oil and other things in the United States jurisdiction. And I think one of the central problems that we see as Open Secrets in this particular instance is that $1.5 billion that Glencore have set aside sounds like an extraordinary amount of money, and it is a lot. But essentially, Glencore will bring that in little over a month. And I think the real question here, both for Glencore executives based in the US, based in Switzerland and elsewhere, The US have said that this was sanctioned and approved by Glencore executives. So when will they have to answer for this conduct? Because I think, as you've implied, Polly, this is conduct that will continue, and Glencore has had an incredibly detrimental impact on countries in Africa and elsewhere by undermining their democracy and contributing to corruption.
Yeah.
And I think their executives have to be forced to answer for that if we're ever going to change that conduct.
Let's bring issues closer to home, Michael. And I'm glad you touched on it a little earlier about the elephant in the room in South Africa, that those who are now very loud voices on social media platforms saying, you've got to look into the Glencore affairs. Ramaphosa was dealing directly with this company. In fact, he had shares in that company. He even chaired Optimum Coal, which belongs to Glencore. Their conduct, of course, is being probed as we speak. But let's touch on what the responsibility for Ramaphosa should be here. Let me remind you what the allegations were before the Zondo Commission, and that is that, by Brian Molefe, that Glencore used its relationship with President Cyril Ramaphosa to try to extort money from the power utility, that's Eskom, to try, as it renegotiated its terms of its contract. Just how big a responsibility is this on the shoulders of Ramaphosa to clear the air, and how does it do that? Because remember, he can't instruct law enforcement, as in fact it was mentioned here in studio by one of his ministers. So law enforcement has got to be seen to be acting independent.
Absolutely. So, Polly, as you've said, the people who are loudest about these allegations, people like Brian Molefe, people like Mochela Koko, are facing very serious allegations. And of course, the great irony that many of us have known for many years is that the purchase of Optimum Coal by the Gupta network, one of the largest swindles in the state capture story in terms of the amount of money that was laundered in order to purchase that asset, that was essentially one network outmaneuvering Glencore that itself has this terrible reputation. And so we had these two actors coming together, and in that case, the Gupta family came away with that asset. I think the very difficult thing is that we have had law enforcement hollowed out by that state capture network over a number of years. And as you've said, what we have to have in this situation is it is not up to the president to deal with allegations of corruption around Glencore, particularly if it implicates him. So if he and Shanduka, as the company that held the share, if there is evidence that they've been involved in wrongdoing, absolutely the National Prosecuting Authority and the Hawks should pursue that information. And as I said at the head of the show, I think one of the very first priorities should be that cross-border cooperation. Given the nature of how Glencore operates, our authority should be going to the United States. To the United States and saying, please provide us all the evidence you have in this case so that we can see what is actionable here.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think what we must be absolutely clear on is that there is no evidence in the public domain that suggests that anything that Glencore has done indicates that what happened afterwards in the Gupta network regarding Optimum Coal was not pure corruption. That evidence is also before the Commission, it's before the MPA, and I would expect many prosecutions to follow very soon.
One of the political parties in the country, the United Democratic Movement, its leader was on this channel, I think it was yesterday, and saying that he has written to the Office of the Public Protector to say, look into the affairs of this company and how deals were conducted here. Do you think that they are on the right footing? We can't forget the controversy that surrounds the person who occupies that office right now.
That's certainly one issue, as you say, but I think there's an even more fundamental issue here, that the types of crimes that Glencore are implicated in around the world, and if there are allegations here, we're speaking about complex economic and financial crimes, that if they are being alleged, the suitable authorities to investigate that in South Africa are the Directorate of Priority Crimes and potentially elements of the MPA. And I think all that can happen with a public protector, regardless of who holds that office, would be a preliminary investigation that would then recommend further action by authorities. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be building the capacity within the Hawks and the MPA to act on this directly. So I certainly don't see the value in it going to the Public Protector's Office first.
That's Michael Marchant. Thank you very much for your insights on this matter, and indeed it is a very, very interesting one. He is head of investigations at Open Sea.